Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to our session today on strategy. Um, and what we are going to try and do across the session is, you know, what when we just say strategy, or when we talk about strategy, what this refers to usually are, the various ways beyond, just specific skills that you have developed. But what are the various approaches that, unconventionally, things that are not, in the rules? How do you try and approach the rules? For example, a team that plays, 3-5-2 in football, that's a tactic, also might be, incorporated as part of their strategy, as well as the fact that some teams might say, mark zonally. If you're playing against Liverpool, you have to mark certain players as a group. You have to mark certain players as an individual. I think that this used to be some kind of popular thing back in the day when, you know, Ronaldo and Messi were very great. People used to, these two, three set of players, you have to mark them. That also functions as some strategy. It's not within the rule, that you have to play the ball, within 90 minutes. You don't have to play the ball outside of the field. That there's a goal post that you have to score. So these are not part of the rules, but these are like the way that you try and approach the game and try to minimize your losses and maximize your wins as well. So that's what essentially that we are going to be covering today. And what we're going to discuss is firstly, what are the goals that you have, or what are the goals that people have at every level of debating? Um, this is pre-tournament, during the tournament, and post-tournament. I think that sometimes the problem that usually a lot of people face when it comes to the sport is that they just set goals that are, unachievable for themselves. And this becomes a very, very big, reason for why, you have set high expectations, you don't meet them, and you get disappointed. So I think that at every level of debating, there are certain goals that you want to achieve. Either it is the case that you just want to attend this tournament so you can improve, in a certain way, and breaking isn't as important. They should be done relative to what skill do you have, how much prep did you have before that particular competition, how much information do you have. Secondly, as well, maybe you just want to break, maybe being part of the top 10 speakers isn't part of your goal. And, it might be the case that you're not disappointed if you break and you're not, breaking with like very high speaks. It might be the case that you just want to win, as some of us would most likely want to do. But the goal that you set at each level, influences the strategy that you have, influences the sort of decisions that you make, prior to the tournament, and what sort of topics do you debate, what topics are you weak on, and that sort of influences your approach. What I always tell people is that your skills are relative to the people that you meet. So this means that the fact that you train very well as a debater, the fact that you spend 4 hours training, doesn't mean that you should beat anyone else. Because you're just assuming that they also don't spend 4 hours training as well. So that's why I always encourage people to minimize their expectations. People are training, you're training, and that's a very good thing that you should be doing. But that doesn't mean that you should consider yourself, you're not alone. Yeah, this is the existential crisis that you have when people always think that, we are always the main character. So you do a very good job when you spend a lot of time training, but you should always consider that you train relative to the, uh efforts of others as well. So if other people are training, then this also means that, maybe you want to increase the tempo, maybe you want to spend 6 hours instead of four. But just to be very clear that, the fact that you spend a lot of time training and then you don't see any result because you still get beat up by certain teams doesn't mean that you are doing a bad job. It just means that other people are also doing a good job as well. And we're also going to discuss, the ways that you try and navigate this. The next thing at this level, is relative to how people approach, a comp, and which is what I'm going to discuss next. I think when people attending a tournament, I've always received requests. Someone will just send me a message and be like, I'm going to be attending 3 tournaments in the next couple of weeks. So I would like for you to train me. I don't know. Like this might be this advice that works for me. Doesn't I don't know if it works for everyone. But I don't think that people should prepare this way. In addition to all of the things I've been saying so far, uh, there is no point to doing debating if you're like just going to attend a comp so you can win. I don't think that this makes any sense, in my own opinion. I think that the reason why we do debating is so that we enjoy the activity and so that we can learn. And this means that, prior to a tournament, your goal isn't, I want to go to the tournament and just win. For all of the reasons I've mentioned so far, but as well is that you can't be trying to win a comp that you're attending 3 weeks to comp. I don't know, like it's gonna be difficult to just decide I'm going to attend a comp in 3 weeks time and I want to be trained, maybe from the intermediate level to the top level, but I just want to train now so I can win in 3 weeks. I don't know, but this approach never really works unless maybe you're going to maybe the comp is like, not very, very great comp in maybe in terms of the quality of the speakers that are attending. So what do I usually recommend that people do prior to a tournament? I always encourage people not to prep with the goal of having to debate a specific tournament. So you might be debating, for example, I think that throughout last year, I only attended, like spoke in person in like 3 tournaments. I think so. Maybe 4. I'm struggling to remember. I only spoke in person at 3 tournaments last year. And I never had any thought on my mind, in the build up to those tournaments that I was going to speak. I was training, I was doing the stuff I was doing because of a particular competition. The reason why, as well, is because it just raises your expectation. If you try and spend a lot of your time, 3 months, 3 weeks rather, prior to a comp, or even 1 month to a comp, and then you spend a lot of your time training, and you don't get to that result, you end up feeling disappointed. And that's, one of the things that hurts your morale. Because when you lose round one, you're like, that's bad. When you lose round one, you're sort of disappointed that you lost round one, and that also affects your morale down the line and means that it's kind of difficult for you to recover. Because the reason why you're doing the activity is to see immediate results, and then not seeing that result is going to, make you feel sad, and also affect, the way that you approach other rounds as well, because you don't think that result or that effort's paying off. The second reason why is just because you can't do a lot in 1 month. Like, how much can you cover in 1 month? It's kind of difficult to cover, reasonable ground. I think that I also saw received this sort of request recently. Someone is asking me, what do I read? And I'm like, okay, but like you could read, and the CS hasn't said any of the stuff that you read. So like, really, that would be being recommending something that you wouldn't like. I personally said, I probably would just recommend workshops for you. But in my head as well, I think that even if you listen to this workshop, most of the stuff that we're going to say here, you have to practice them. So for example, me saying that you have to do stuff, maybe months before, or even not prep with the idea that you're going to attend the comp, but prepping because you want to improve might just be more beneficial than prepping because you want to attend the comp. So if you maybe wait till 1 month before you listen to this workshop, then this might be, bad advice. If like 1 month to comp, then I go to, the YouTube video link and decide to watch this workshop, then this might be bad advice for you at that point, because there's no way you are able to implement the advice. So this means that, your ability to read and take in information at that point is limited because of the volume of information that you can consume is smaller. Also, the CAs may not set on the stuff that you have read, so this might also be, not work for you if you decide to do it in a small period of time. The next thing in terms of this is that if you decide to prep like a long time before the tournament happens, if you decide to prep without even having a comp in mind, so you might be attending a competition, next week, and you still decide to take this advice. The advice is going to be incorporated on this. But the goal here is that you don't feel pressured when you are taking in any information that you're taking in. So you are enjoying the process of taking in that information. You're not under stress about whether or not the CAs are going to set this topic, whether or not this topic makes sense. You're just going to be interested in learning, and that's going to be good for you, which means that attending a comp next week and performing badly at that comp isn't going to stop you from reading more, isn't going to make you feel bad about what you've read so far, because you just enjoy reading. And for me, I enjoy reading. Like, I read a lot of stuff every day, not because I'm going to attend a prom. And that just makes the process of reading more meaningful. So this means when someone says, read stuff on Al Jazeera, on Le Monde, on New York Times, etc., you know, very sound advice, but when you're doing it in a high pressure environment, it's going to be kind of difficult for you to digest that information or find that information that's meaningful in the first place. So yeah, prior to a tournament, what you want to be doing is that you want to work on your weaknesses as much as possible. So if you know that you are very, very good, with hypothetical motions, or you're very, very good with social justice motions, and you're bad at IR and economics, you want to do more of those debates. You want to read more on those topics. You know that that's your weak point, and you want to improve it as much as possible. So that's what you should be doing prior to a tournament. Because what you are good at doing, you're always going to be good at doing. You're always going to be able to incorporate those. I usually think that some people try to maximize on their strengths, which is good, great advice. Some people have a superpower. For example, if you see Matt Kaito, people would say that he's very, very good at mechanization. Tamar is very, very good at weighing, etc. So yeah, it's good to have a strength like a superpower, but it's also, bad to have an Achilles heel, because if people know what your weak or blind spots are, then they are always going to go for it as well. So this means that prior to a tournament, you should be working on your blind spots. I think that this is practical advice, because every time I attend a comp, especially in round one, when I meet certain novices, the round one motion is very accessible if you have a good CA. So they're going to really know some stuff about the motion, but they're going to miss out on one thing, either because they're just bad at framing stuff. So I presumably, try and check on the novice team sometimes, walk around and see what they're doing, maybe just, observe a random spar. So I think that I've had this discussion most of the times with certain novices I've met in the past. So there was this round where I met a team, and then they were like, "Oh, you were very, very, mean to us in this round, etc. Like, you didn't really care that we were novices." And you sort of went on about this particular mistake that we made. Oh, I was like, I anticipated you were going to make that mistake. So I'd already observed some of your rounds in the past, and I knew that that was going to be a problem or a difficulty that you're going to experience in the debate. So yeah, it also comes from being able to understand that certain people have weaknesses. And if you have weaknesses, people are going to exploit that weakness. So if you know that you are bad at IR motions or econ motions, you're going to struggle in those rounds. You want to know more about the stuff as well. Secondly, if you know that you are bad in CG, you want to spend more time doing this particular role. It may be in your spar practice, maybe you want to do, a personal practice where you have emotion. You sit down, come up with argument four, and then sit down again and, think about arguments beyond what you have already written down in the first place. So trying to, train your brain as well prior to the competition to adapt to what your weaknesses are will help you, because one, your strengths most likely will reign your strength, vastly because maybe you study that particular course. So it's kind of easy for you to, do stuff when it comes to, psychology. It's easy for you to understand maybe philosophy, because maybe that's your major and that's what you study. So that means that you always have, classroom practice of this, and you pretty much remain your strength. Maybe you just watch a lot of movies. That means you know so much about pop culture. So it's always going to be your strength because it's easy for you to read. But you want to spend the time that you don't have, that you have rather, the longest time before that particular competition, trying to learn more about, trying to improve on your weaknesses, because that's going to be difficult for you to do. That's going to take a lot more of your time. So this is what you want to focus on doing as well. Secondly, and all of this I said as well are independent of the competition that you're attending. So you're not doing this with the idea that I have to learn this so that I can do well at PhDC, or whatever your regional major is. It's not going to help you, because like anytime you have that at the back of your mind, then you're going to feel very stressed when you don't achieve that goal in round one. And that's just going to hurt your morale immediately. That particular competition, starts as well. Yes. So I think that is very, very important prior to a tournament that, I know a lot of people might ask me about reading sources, how to read at the end, but I think that broadly I've highlighted some stuff about this. Um, but beyond, reading, or when it comes to reading rather, when I recommend news articles for people, I always tell them, that news articles are great. They're fine, just keeping yourself updated about the world, but they shouldn't be the basis for you to form your opinions about the world. Why? Because the people who write them are biased. Like, every time you see this, like if you read a particular newspaper very often, you notice that they're leaning somewhere. Uh, no matter how independent that they claim to be, but it's good to read them. I'm not saying that it's bad to read them. It's good to read them so you're updated about the world. And also it offers you that, and that's like not a bad thing, that news articles are biased because, in some way that offers you multiple ideas about how to characterize certain issues. So the goal of this advice might mean that, don't focus too much on one newspaper. Like if you probably read Al Jazeera, then you might want to balance it with a little bit of, I don't know which one is right leaning here. I think CNN. You might want to balance it with a bit of a right leaning newspaper. Because like, maybe left leaning arguments are good in debates, but sometimes, some right leaning argument might make sense. So you want to have a very balanced way to characterize emotion. If you are on a side where you might need to do that as well. So the issues that are discussed around the world are often discussed in various ways. So that's why you want to have a balance of opinion when you read, knowing fully well that the people who are narrating those issues or stories to you are writing it from their own perspective. So it shouldn't be the basis for you to form your opinion. It should be the basis for you to understand why things are happening and for you to be able to track patterns and trends. Because obviously the goal of reading isn't just so that you can dump in fact on the judges, simply because one is going to be difficult for them to be able to, credit this. Like spectrology is kind of really hard for people to credit based on how ambiguous it is with the rules. So being able to monitor the patterns and trends, that's why, the fact that those newspapers are explaining why they think those things is happening is something that you should take note of, but it shouldn't be the basis of your opinion as well. So you're very flexible and able to adapt in debates, either to counter characterize against other teams, as well, in this sort of way. And that's why reading multiple sources is good. Secondly, is that I think that watching a lot of debates helps you improve. Watching a lot of good debates. That's what I would say. I'm not going to give examples, but watching a lot of good debates is good. Just because it helps you understand how cases evolve. I think that in the build up to a tournament, you want to maybe see a series of a particular competition. Maybe you want to see a series of UADC, maybe a couple of the out rounds and the in rounds, from maybe one year, one time to the other, maybe 2000 and 15, and now you want to cross reference it with 2025, because broadly you might meet some similar debate motions, but you might see certain patterns in way that arguments evolved or did not evolve, and you want to be aware of this. So this is also important to how you read, and also being able to understand how very good speakers around the world also make arguments as well, and understand what the differences are with yours, and that you also make your own argument. Yeah. So prior to the tournament as well, it's very, very important that just the way I said earlier, that people are watching out for your weaknesses. It's also important that the strengths and the weaknesses of the people that you will meet at the con. Um, who are the strongest teams that you're going to meet at a particular competition? This might be hard for you to see, if you haven't seen the speakers tab, but as well, you often have this conversation around with people. You see people that we talk about this. I'm attending this particular competition. So you want to know who the strongest teams are in the competition, and take note of this, as well as the teams that you are more likely to meet, the teams that are within your bracket, and the teams that are as strong as you, or as weak as you as well. So this is important because for the teams that are stronger than you, they are the teams that are likely to beat you in certain rounds. You want to know how to approach them. Why are they strong? If you say a team is stronger than you, why are they strong? Are they just strong because you think that they are very experienced and good at debating? This is not a reason for why a team is strong. a team is stronger than you because they can do something, better than you in debates. And you want to know what they can do, that why are they stronger than you, and try to approach or cut down on that particular weakness or that particular difference that exists in skill level between your team and theirs. So this might mean that you have watched the debates of that particular team and notice that this is what they're very good at. They're very good at, framing. They're very good at analysis. They're very good at responses. Knowing fully well that this team is good at this, and this might mean that if you meet them, if you're OG and they're CEO, it's going to be difficult because they have a lot of time to, to respond to you. Maybe at that point you want to make their case, make it difficult for them to make their own constructive case. You want to put them on the back foot by framing them out of the round in terms of the maybe material that they're going to offer in the first place, or this might mean that you want to give them a lot to respond to as well. If a team is very good at responses and they're speaking after you, this might be a problem. So this might mean that you want to spend a very good time explaining your case as effectively as possible in a way that's difficult for them to rebut. I think that we covered rebuttals earlier. You might want to check that and see, the various ways people try to destroy your case. So knowing this stuff, that you want to, double check that you're making the analysis as correctly as possible. So it's like less vulnerable to rebut. And, if a team spends a lot of time trying to rebut you, then this might mean that, you probably take a second even if they're successful. So yes, additionally, the teams that you frequently meet, the teams in your bracket, the teams that are as strong as you and as weak as you as well. So yeah, you want to also know, what teams that you guys are probably in the same level, and also be able to understand as well what they're good at and what they are not very good at, and try to, get past them prior to the competition, try to improve in a way that means that you're able to minimize that difference that exists between them. And the general advice here prior to the tournament is that you always want to ensure that you are improving on your weaknesses. What your strengths are will probably remain your strengths. It will be easier for you to, improve on. If you spend 1 hour trying to improve on analysis and you're already good at analysis, that will how do people say in debates? That is like to a greater scale will improve more than if you spend 4 hours, if you spend 1 hour on your weakness, spending 1 hour on something that you're weak at and spending 1 hour on something that you're good at, it's not going to yield the same results, because if you are good at something and you enjoy doing it, then it means that you need less time to, improve on it. If you are not very good at something, it means that you need more time to improve on it, so that's the most important thing. Yeah. The next thing is, how do we approach every round? Yeah. So when you see the draw, when you see the draw, you see teams in that particular room. How do you approach each round? I think that usually people would say, the judges are important. Who are the judges in that room? But yeah, it's usually 15 minutes. Sometimes the judges even change during, your prep. So I think that a lot of this might be more dynamic when it comes to judging. But when it comes to the teams that you meet and your rules in that particular round, this also implies the sort of strategy that you pick or the way that you approach each round as well. So how do we do this? When you see the draw and you see the teams in your room, and you note your role, you always know what the weaknesses would come with that particular role. So say for instance, you're OG in a room, and maybe it's a debate about social justice, etc., which a lot of people have a lot of information about. So that means that trying to leave your closing team extensioners may not be good for you. If it is the case that they are not, maybe a novice team. If the closing team is equally as good as you, then your goal in that round is not to try and leave them extensionless, which might be bad strategy. As well as the fact that on the upside, they'll probably have something to say. So this means that usually people in that round are going to converge around the same impact. You're not going to expect something wild in that particular round. What's going to be the problem in that round is just going to be a problem in terms of analysis. That's going to be the difference between all of the teams in the debates. So this means that for you to win, you don't have to spend time thinking about what is opposition going to run, because everything that they're going to run is going to pretty much converge around, maybe helping that particular group Uh, so it might be very, very radical for a team to explain, why not helping that group is in their interest, or why not helping that group is in broad society's interest and will win. Might not be very intuitive, so it's kind of very hard and radical to run. But yeah, what I'm trying to get at here is that in this sort of round, trying to leave people, extensionless is going to be hard because this is something that people really don't really have so much information about. But what you want to try and do is ensure that every idea that you have, you are explaining it very clearly in a way that engages with what you are likely to get from them on opposition as well. So, what is going to be the biggest opposition concern in the debates about quotas? It might be to say that that subtly might mean that those groups are there's some sort of reverse race, how do you say, reverse racism that occurs, or reverse sexism that occurs with that thing that, means that people discredit that particular group when you give them quotas. Because both sides are trying to reach for the same impact, but what people might say is that, the way that these quotas might manifest might mean that, a lot of people stigmatize this group for the sort of benefit that you give them. So this is maybe you're building your case around why quotas help them, but you want to build your case about why quotas can help them against why the experiences that they have when they get these quotas is going to be good. So if you are analyzing this properly, other people will have something to say, but most of the time you would win. And this is generally how I think that it is ideal to approach every round. Obviously the dynamics are different, because of the fact that you might beat a team that is not very good in that room, and that means that you're more safe, from your up teams, from your up bench, and you're less safe from the closing. So I think that the most important thing that happens here is that you want to know what the motion is, what the motion requires people to do, and what the teams are in your room, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. So sometimes you might meet certain teams or know certain teams that are radical every time. Like, maybe I've met them in a spa before, watched them debate. And you know that they are always going to go like very, very radical in this kind of debates. This might mean that, you just want to leave them alone. You want to leave them alone as much as possible because trying to focus on controlling how radical they can be may not be in your own interest. And you want to ensure that you explain your case very clearly, try to engage them in a POI and move on. If it is the case that, they still attempt to be radical, the judges believe them very fine. If they don't, then that's up to them as well. So I think that the approach here is to, as much as possible, try and win relative to all of the other factors that are present in that room, in that round, the motion, the teams, and as well, the sort of experiences the experience that they have. The final thing here that I would say when it comes to, how you approach each round is that the motions that you're going to experience in each round are likely to be, different, not radically different, but are likely to be different in the way that, they require or reward different skills. So this means that emotion might reward, people who are very good at analysis. And emotion might reward people who are very good at weighing. I think usually, like we discussed this sort of thing when we talked about hypothetical motions. So also knowing very well what the skills in that round are going to, what the motion is going to reward a lot in that particular round is also important in terms of, what you're going to say and what sort of arguments that you're going to run and how you're going to anticipate what other people are going to run and how important are those things. Yeah. The final thing is that you cannot control every factor in the room as well. Sorry, I said that was the final thing, but this one is you cannot control every factor in the room. You cannot decide what arguments that people are going to run. But usually, if you're not opening government, you can also see where the debate is going. If you're not OG, you probably know what CEO asked to OG in a POI, and probably if you're OO, you probably heard what LO what TG is asking to your first speaker as a POI as well. So this means that during the debates, you are picking what strategy to use. And this is also important that your approach prior to the start of the round doesn't end at the start of the round, but also during the debates, then that means that you're listening and trying to see what also other teams are picking as their strategy to win. Don't get caught up in it because it shouldn't dictate where you go. as much as it should just help you understand where they're going and if maybe that's important. So this doesn't mean that it's him that's trying to run that asking a POI that, what about this? And you sort of try and think that's the case. You should evaluate whether or not that thing is important in the first place and move on. So for example, this is usually what I notice most of the time when I'm judging a debate, that sometimes the teams in the long diagonal are usually clashing with each other. Because presumably from prep time, OJ has something to say or has something else to say that they have prep, and they never really respond to each other. But because back half teams want to clash on something and have an extension, they sort of pick as a strategy, what OJ is saying and what OO is saying from CG. So sort of try and engage with it and respond to it via their own extension. So yeah, given that this is something that you might see oftentimes in most debates, you also want to include this in terms of how you adapt while the debate is happening in each round, and also not get caught up. Because if you lose round one, you take a fourth in round one, fine. You take a fourth in round two, fine. But I always encourage people not to fixate. Like fixating on a loss could be bad for you. This means that if you feel the call was terrible, the call was bad, please just move on. Like as long as it's not the final round, just move on and continue doing, what you're doing. Like approach the next round, try to win the next round. Don't feel disappointed or crash out or lash out at the judges that that was a terrible call. I even will encourage that you don't spend your time trying to feel feedback. If it is the case that you're so emotional and you're going to spend a lot of your time feeling feedback in the way, that means that you're not mentally ready for the next round because you're still upset about or disappointed in yourself or disappointed in your partner. So if you feel sad after the outcome of each particular round, what I would encourage is try to do something that makes you feel good. Maybe it's music, try to listen to very good music. Maybe you want to listen to something that gets you in the mood for the next round. You want to try and do that. Try to take your mind onto something that motivates you or makes you happy. Because not doing that would mean that your mood for that particular round is going to affect your next round, and you probably will lose again. That's usually what happens. When people take a fourth and they're disappointed and they really don't listen to the OA or something. You might have a good case, or rather, you might perhaps maybe thought that you maybe take a first or a second, and the call is just weird. So I would just encourage you to listen to why, or if you don't have any interest at all in listening, then as much as possible that you don't try to be salty in a way that would affect you in the next round. So I think it's to try and it's happened. There's no amount of annoyance that you're going to have that will change the result of any round. But the problem here is that if you just let it get to you too much, then that means that you would lose the next one most likely. Which shouldn't be the round that you lose, because if you probably take a fourth in one round, then you meet weaker teams in the next round. So this means that if you let the result get to you and you're so upset, then this would just affect your mood. Also would affect your partner as well, and this is something that you want to be aware of as much as possible. Yeah. So I think that the next thing is opening half strategy. Yeah. Both halves have a strategy, opening and closing. And for the opening half strategy, this is what it looks like and how people prep. I'm just going to discuss how you prep and how you debate. I'm not going to talk about the specific case that you run. But when people are prepping in opening half, usually you have limited time to prep as opening, even though everyone has 15 minutes to prep. Generally because you have to start speaking almost immediately if you're PM, or 7 minutes later if you're LO. The way that you want to try and prep as much as possible is to write down what obviously what you're going to be able to run from opening. You don't have to deep think the debates from opening half. You don't have to deep think the motion. Presumably what are the most important cases that you can run in that particular debate. And what you want to do now at this particular point is to change and adapt to what the opposition teams are likely to say. This is the most important thing, which is so you don't lose, especially if you're opening gov or even if you're opening opposition as well. The way that you approach prep is that your case are easily accessible to you. The most important thing that you should be guarding yourself against are what is the opposition going to say about your case and what are they going to say as their own constructive. I think I had this fun time when I partnered someone and we used to always have a go at each other during prep. So what we'll do is that anytime we were opening, we write down our cases, maybe first 2 or 3 minutes. We know what the gov is going to run or the op is going to run on this motion. And it's sort of easy because like immediately when you get used to BP, once you see yourself as OG, you sort of magically feel like, OG or gov. Like even years later, you feel like, this side of the motion that you were on is probably more correct. I'm not saying that this is the general rule of thumb, but immediately you get the motion, you probably know the stuff that you want to run. If you don't know, then this might just be a knowledge problem. But yeah, 3 minutes already. We already knew what we were going to run. So what we did is that we spent like next 5 minutes discussing the op team and what they're going to say. And once we're done, then we spend the remaining 2 minutes out of 10 start discussing our case. What's the like response that people are going to get, and with the other person tries to respond to the case. So that's what we try and do in prep. So I in the previous maybe come up with the case, and then my partner gives me some response to the case I already have. So at that point, then what we are trying to do is to try and gut check that even if we did run this and everyone else in the debate has something else to say, will still be relevant to the debate is over. Because we will explain our case in a way that is less vulnerable to any sort of response, as well as the fact that most of the time, then your closing becomes contingent on the stuff that you have already provided. But more importantly, is that you don't get lost in what the opposition team is going to say because you are able to attack it. Attack it, immediately the debate starts, or you have some sort of idea about it. So we spent, some sort of roughly equal amount of time in the first 10 minutes of our prep discussing what the gov and the op case looks like. Particularly focusing a lot more on what the op case is going to be, given that we know our case and we know how to run it a lot more than the op case, which is something that's hard given that you are gov in that round and the other team is up. It's going to be very hard for you to try and prep like them because that's what we try to do. We're not trying to say what would up run, but if I was up, what is the best case that I would run? What would I run to win? Not just what would I run. That's usually the way that we sort of try and approach our prep time. The next thing here is how do you approach the debate? And I think that this is just relevant to, your listening as opening gulf or opening opposition. I encourage for everyone in the debates to be attentive as possible. But if you're PM or LO, much doesn't change beyond your prep time. Much doesn't change. But if you're DPM and DLO, this is where this advice becomes, important. You don't get to talk to your partner once they start speaking as, immediately. And if you're PM, you shouldn't be disturbing your partner from listening, while the debate is happening, maybe while LO is speaking or while the PM is speaking. You shouldn't be distracting your partner. They should have time to listen to the debate. So because they're going to speak, next. So distracting them may not be very, very good because it may miss out on something, as well as the fact that you might be overloading them with a lot of information at that point, given that they have a lot to do. Like if you're DPM and DLO, I usually feel that these are very difficult roles because at that point, you have to, check and see what is missing in your partner's case, what you have to respond to at all, and how you have to weigh your case against back half, even maybe what there's a POI that you've heard from them or what you think that they presumably would try to focus on and run. So it's kind of a very difficult role at this point, and overloading people with information may not be, the best. If you think that something is very, very important, and try as much as possible to convey it collectively to your partner on the note, or try to tell them, when someone isn't speaking, because this might just distract them. At that point, maybe L pause to take a POI, and then that's the point where you're telling your partner something, then you just distract them from hearing, the POI. This also is a strategy that I employ. I might encourage people to use it. But if I'm OG or OO, I don't ask a POI to the first speaker in that thing. I don't try to ask a POI unless maybe I'm speaking against novices at back half. I try as much as possible to let closing teams ask a POI. Usually because that would give me an idea of what they want to say or what they don't want to say as well. So this also applies to what I said earlier. Don't fixate, because some closing teams may try to goad you into, thinking that that's your case when it's not. But what you're trying to do is think about it. If it doesn't make sense, the POI that CG is asking doesn't make sense, then it doesn't really make sense. That's the thing. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. Then you shouldn't spend time on something that doesn't make sense. If it's something that makes sense that you think that presumably they might run, then you might want to explain, or take this case from them as well. So usually the reason why, most of the time I might let my closing team to ask my opposing opening team a POR is to have an idea of what they run and see if it's worth stealing or not worth stealing as well. So that's usually, some unconventional strategy that I apply at opening half. Uh, Additionally, as well, is to try and take a POI and not to just try and take a POI from closing, but try and take a POI from opening as well. Especially if you're PM or if you're LO, I think it's very advisable to take a POI from both teams. I think that the trend of POIs is evolving to the point where you're required to take two in every speech. This means that, that means you should be taking from both teams on the opposing bench. But if you have to prioritize at opening half, prioritize taking one from CO because you'd hear for a lot of time. But if you can take both, please take both. Encouraged to take both, especially because of the fact that if you're OG and you don't take, OO in DPM, then this might mean that, they will respond to you. If you try to take them in DPM, then you might have an idea of how they will try to respond to you, and try to react to that, before your speech is over. Because trying to control what CO would run is difficult. CO could just have a new idea before they get to speak, and you just wasted your time when you could have easily beaten opening or opposition. So usually the goal that I always set for myself if I'm at opening is to always ensure that I'm winning the opening half and the bench. This is usually the goal I try to set for myself. If OO is a very good team, then this means that CO will probably lose as well. So what I'm trying to do is try to beat my closing, not by trying to out-extend them. It's going to be difficult to out-extend a good closing team as well, but by trying to analyze your case as properly as possible and provide the best response to the opposition team. Because if you don't respond very well to OO, then CG will do the response for you and beat you. If you respond well to O, then CG would have an extension, but maybe the extension might not be engaging to O that the judge considers very relevant as well. So the goal here is to ensure that you're doing your job at OG, checking what are the most important cases to run from prep. I have first 3 minutes of prep, I have like 5 ideas. Which ones are the most important? And I got checked them with my partner. Oh, just this 2 or just this 3. So we prioritize running this 3. Maybe CG can talk about those 2. We don't care. Next then is to anticipate what the opposing side is going to say, and try and react to that as well in prep, and try to see how we can come up with responses that integrates them in our speech. And finally then is to try as much as possible to engage everyone with POIs, for prioritizing the closing diagonal team as well. So if you're OG, you want to prioritize taking a POI from CO, even though you might be encouraged to take a POI from O as well if you have one. So you have an insight about what they want to say before they say it as well, and have also some time to react to it. And as much as possible that you're guaranteed to beat, OO, because the strategy of CO might change given that they have a lot of time, but it's very difficult for opening opposition to change their strategy, anyways, because like once you've had LO speak, DLO cannot really sharp them as well. So they have to stay pretty much consistent in order for them to, stand a chance. But CO haven't spoken, so if they see that they're wrong already, then they might just change their strategy. And if you spend a lot of time focusing on what they already consider to be wrong, then you might lose. I think I gave some interesting example the last time when we were talking about hypothetical motions and how we sort of goaded our opening team by asking a POI from closing. Like we asked a POI to OG from CO about the case that we prepped and thought was useless. But the reason why we asked that POI was so that, opening opposition would focus on that POI because they thought we were a good team. I think that we were, I don't know, but they thought we were a good team. So given that we asked that POI, then that means that was the case that we're going to run. So they didn't spend time trying to think if the case made sense. What they spent a lot of time trying to do was to make an argument for that POI that we pointed out, which wasn't what we're going to run anyway. So when you hear the POI, the goal is not for you to steal their case immediately. You might just be stealing a bad case and focusing and having less time to focus on your own good case. You want to check, is this case actually making sense? Like someone asks the POI, but does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, then you might point it out quickly. It's not going to be something you spend a lot of time doing. But you might just point it out, in like 5 seconds that presumably this stuff doesn't make sense. Or if it does make sense, you might want to point out that maybe it's contingent. If you don't want to spend time talking about it, you might want to explain why it would rely on the important explanation that you provided for it to work. And that's some, weighing that you provided, earlier on in the round. They might change their strategy at CG, but it's going to take them a lot more time for them to do so. So this means that if you have this in mind, it will be difficult for you to, lose at opening, because this would mean every time that you are opening gov or opening opposition, you are always going to be beating your closing and, the opposing team in the opening half as well. So this would be some sort of insurance that you have. Most likely that you would beat CG if you're OO, or beat CO if you're OG as well. Because if you have a good opening half debate, then presumably they'll be out as well. So yes, that's all about opening half strategy. Unless people have any questions about this, what I've said so far. So please put them in the chat or raise a hand before I talk about closing half. All right. I don't think people have any questions. So I'm just going to talk about closing half strategy quickly. So when it comes to closing half, the strategy here, usually, and from prem, is that I think that people when they talk about when they go to back half, so Kaushik, we are close. Oh, sorry, I think we made a mistake. So no worries. So when we talk about closing half, I think that the problem that most people might make here when it comes to closing half is that they think that they should spend their 50 minutes of prepping a case. I don't know, but I think that this is bad. Like, if you spend all of your 50 minutes of prep, trying to develop an argument, you probably will lose, because like, how are you so certain that opening wouldn't run it? Okay, someone asked the question. I will talk about it very soon. Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about your question at the end of this. Yeah, but what I'm trying to say here, we're closing. Like, you go into prep time and you like have, how do you say, 5 arguments, and then you're like developing them. How are you so certain that opening wouldn't run them? I think that's a fundamental problem that people make. That's the misconception that people have of closing half. That the entirety of that closing 15 minutes is to come up with an extension and develop that extension. Nope. The way that I try to prep a closing half, and I think that the way that this might be useful for people, is I divide the work. Like, we spend like 7 minutes apart, myself and my partner. And what we try to do is think of every possible case to run on the side that we're on. Every possible case. So not to develop them, but to think of every possible idea, that we can talk about everything, every idea. And we'll try to write this down. If we are stuck on ideas, then we move to responses. How can we respond to the opposing side? So we write as much as possible every possible case that we can run as an idea, every possible response that we can make. Once we're done, we try to think of, okay, these are the cases that we have identified, but like, what would these cases require to run them? What are the burdens of proof in each of these arguments? So what we try to do is to make burdens or make, explanations in each argument. Okay, you want to prove that minorities will be helped. Firstly, maybe let's say with the motion about, allocating quotas to minorities. One, you have to be able to explain that these quotas, they're able to access them. So like, if you would give, quotas for women on, board of executives at, large corporations, for example, you have to explain that, one, women have the necessary skills in order for them to be able to access the education that would require them to get into these positions in the first place. So this sort of becomes an important link in the argument to prove that people can access that quota in the first place. Secondly, you might want to explain, how they would relate to that, quota, how being in that particular position means that you're able to maximize uh your the benefit that you get out of that position. Like being in a position doesn't mean that you benefit from it. You might suffer, maybe from burnout, from the fact that people hate you, the environment is hostile, etc. So you want to explain why the environment is conducive enough for people to make any sort of benefit. Additionally, as well, you want to actually explain why people think or rationalize that this stuff is beneficial to them. Maybe you make some money, but it's not really clear why people might rationalize this as a benefit. Maybe it's just the case that there are no secondary impacts that people are making of the particular arguments. Like, the fact that you make money, how do you use this money? People might use this to maybe uplift their communities, but people might assume this as well, that, one person from the community makes it, everyone else in the community is going to make it. So they're not able to successfully explain why one person from that community entering into that system is going to help other individuals, or why they would have that incentive to do so, why they would be able to, and in what ways that they will be able to. All of these are burdens in one single argument of trying to explain why this helps minorities. So what you want to do is identify a burden in an argument, and what are the important links that are in that particular argument. What do you have to prove in order for this argument to be complete? Once you have identified these burdens, then this means that you are able to spend more time than analyzing and seeing what is opening going to miss. So like, what is my opening might run this argument, fair enough, but I might miss out on a particular burden in the argument that you are just able to explain and win easily. So I think that this is also one route to go about this. I think an example was like, we debated a motion last year. The motion was this house would ban for-profit hospitals. And anyone that knows that this sort of debates, like, it's always going to be easy for people to run the obvious cases of open house. And one obvious case that people would run, we were CEO in that debate, and one obvious case that people would run from up is that, if you ban for profit hospitals, then people would be discouraged from working in health sector, because government is going to pay them as much as the private sector. So like opening opposition, they run this, people would always run this argument. Like if you ban anything that's for profit, you discourage competition, less investment, less people get employed, more people get laid off. Makes sense. But what we try to do is that, what is the comparative of this point? Like maybe it is the case that doctors lose their job, but why would it be difficult for them to get a new job? Because that's presumably the response that you'd get. And why should we prioritize doctors having their job over the fact that certain people are losing out for the fact that you have for-profit hospitals? If like the upside is going to say that the problem with for-profit hospitals is that people are denied access to healthcare, what is the reason why some doctors losing their job matters? So these are like the different burdens that we try to identify. The fact that people lose their jobs is a problem, but it's not the most important problem in this round. So you have to really explain why people would lose their job and not get a new job, because that's a potential response that you get. So what we did, this was part of the extension. I think that we had so much extensions in that debate. Like we had extensions coming out of our eyes and ears that round. But yeah, what we tried to do here was to say that one important link in the argument that wasn't explained is why doctors would lose their job and not get a new one, because they spend a lot of time on their job. This is what we said. In order for you to get that degree in the first place, you have to spend a lot of time, studying. You have to spend a vast amount of your time. I think that in Nigeria, for example, you have to spend 6 years, and then you have to do some additional time in house management. And ultimately as well, it's domineering. It's like a lot of people can do. I am not saying this as an attack on any field as well, but I think that you could do sociology and be very cool, and participate in extracurricular activity, whereas it will be difficult for you to do so if you are a doctor as well. So what we said is that a lot of the skills that people who become doctors acquire, or people who practice in the medical field acquire, are limited to medicine. Like the only skills that they are able to develop, given the amount of time that particular field takes from them, is in that particular direction of medicine. And this means that even if they lose their job, it's going to be difficult for them to find a new one, which defeats that obvious response. But additionally as well, this also means that on our side, having them, with their job means that they have even if they have some time, like, you work in a private hospital and then you have a shift. A lot of the doctors who, contribute to aid services, or, people who work at NGOs are also doctors that work in, private firms as well. Because of the fact that their socialization is around that field, they sort of feel, motivated or incentivized to help. That they have no other skills. So like, you presumably have to go play piano on the weekend. So like the sort of thing that gives them happiness or enjoyment, given their level of socialization, is doing, medical, services, like medical outreaches. They have a community of doctors, etc. So that means that the fact that you work in a private hospital doesn't mean that you don't contribute to society, which means that losing that job might mean that you have less resources to do that particular stuff in the first place. So this proved that comparatively, the ways in which doctors engaged with, providing access to medical services on the comparative, given that they have a job, was better because their life was stable. But if you lose their job, their lives become more unstable. They don't have any money, etc. But this is what opening had proved. But the fact that they don't have money is just bad because they can't get another job elsewhere, given that a lot of their education and experience, to a very large extent, is centralized in medicine. So yeah, this was the sort of way that we tried to extend on that particular argument, given that the two burdens that we're missing there is what is the comparative and why can doctors not find another job. So yes, this is something that you can always identify from prep, that these are the burdens that your opening team is likely to miss out on. So they would just go out and be like, doctors lose their job. Not doctors lose their job, can't find another job elsewhere, because that's an obvious response. And that obvious response also leads you to why doctors not losing their job is important for society, even if they work in private hospitals, or for profit hospitals rather. So yeah, this is like one example, but the goal here and what we are doing at back half is to ensure that you have as much options. You're trying to increase the options that you have to win. This doesn't mean that you're developing the argument. So none of these arguments we developed in preps. Like when we just had this idea, we wrote it down. We wrote down a lot more stuff. We wrote down, stuff about the stock market, etc. If people lost their job, then this might just, if you ban for-profit hospitals, then this might just be a problem for, the stock market, given that, a lot of these for-profit hospitals, the windfalls of their profit goes to, pharmacy and pharmaceutical services. That might mean that, if it is the case that there is, you ban them, then that just might crumble or crash the stock market analytically via the mechanism of how they contribute, but also, optically in terms of how people might view medicine as a whole. So that just might be a problem. So we just had all of this as options. So stock market could crash, signaling for-profit hospitals, doctors not being employed, etc. Could, crash the stock markets in this way. Medical services, quality, why is it better on our side? Why does it decrease on their side, etc., etc. So this might go beyond the mechanism of competition that people will talk about, innovation as well that people will talk about at top half. So you just want to develop more mech as well under this sort of thing by identifying, what would opening teams miss out on and how many options could you have if they did miss out on something here. So yeah, this is how you approach prep. And usually when you come out of prep time, you presumably have like 20 stuff that you could say, or 20 ways that you could, 20 different options that you can access. And yeah, no matter how good your opening is, they can never do 10 in 14 and a half minutes. They can never do it well enough. They can never do all of the stuff that I've identified, no matter how good they are. This doesn't mean that they cannot do the most important stuff, but this means that you wouldn't, come out and be like, I have no extension, which would just be, just a bad element of you fixating on what you are not supposed to fixate on during prep time. Another example was, I think that we had this really shallow motion in some way one time about how do you say philanthrocapitalism. So it was about this house believes that African billionaires should invest in charity. So what we did from prep is that we sort of identified basic case, like everyone would say, they should invest, they stole from people and that sort of thing. But what we thought about here is that there was a keyword in motion that people were missing out on, which was like invest. Investing in charity is sort of different from like donating to charity. Like I think that's different. Maybe most of the judges in that round didn't agree as well. But yeah, this is like clarification we got from Cap at the end of the round. But yeah, investing in charity is like philanthrocapitalism. So like what Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, for example, has the Zuckerberg Chan initiative. It's to sort of stuff where, it's not like you're donating your money to charity, but you're like investing in something that, contributes, like either making mosquito nets, for example, and making the stuff, but then buying it off from yourself to donate to others. So like, but you're making the stuff. It's like a business venture. So it's not like I'm going to give $20 million to charity, but I'm going to spend $20 million setting up a factory that makes mosquito nets, and the mosquito nets I'm just going to buy for myself and uh donate it to a specific country that suffers from malaria. So it's sort of different. Like investing in charity is sort of different from donating in charity, and that was something that we thought that the opening teams in that debate did miss out on, and it was something that we identified from prep. So that would essentially change the debates, anyways. Those are like wild options, but we just had that as an option in prep that people would miss out on the fact that the motion is saying should invest in charity, not that they should donate to charity, which would be a different way. It would affect the motion, given that investment is sort of competitive, and the language there sort of changes essentially the incentive of African billionaires. Also might change, the game when it comes to people should, and the moral question there about whether or not they should or shouldn't. So yes, in the debates, as closing, given that you already have a lot of options that you can choose from, you also want to listen as much as possible. And I think that sometimes people don't listen to what other people are saying in the debates, and they're spending so much time trying to come up with an extension, and trying to think of what people haven't thought of. You can't do this, but if you're not listening, how are you so sure that what you're going to think of isn't something that has been said during the debate? That's the problem. And this means that when you have your your list, like the two, how do you say, the list that I just identified that you make during prep time, this means that when you're listening, then you're taking off things that has been said already and that you wouldn't say off that particular list. So this is what you're doing. Someone has run this argument. You have like 20 options for that list, and then on one, then you just take it off. You're not going to run that again. And secondly, as well, some people would say, I have an idea, I want to give it to my partner, their member. Good, but like, there are breaks in between the round. There are breaks in between the round where, PM stops speaking and then Elo is invited to speak. That's when you should be talking to your partner. Especially as whip, you're going to be the one who decides, the ranking of the debates in some way, like, discuss rather the ranking of the round. It's just bad practice if you are actually not listening. Like, it's just really bad. If you don't listen at all to what other people are saying in the debates, then how are you going to respond? Like, how are you going to understand who is winning? How are you going to understand who is losing? So within the debates, I always encourage people to also minimize interactions with their partner, especially from backup. Like, you can't sort of make this mistake in opening house. Like, not a lot of things have been said, but in backup, it's just really tricky because you have to consider everything that has been said so you don't repeat your opinion. I see a lot of teams like discussing why their opening team or their opening speakers debating. They're just talking over their opinion. How are you going to know what they said and what they haven't said? Or discussing while opposition teams are speaking. True, you can't do that. Maybe they're not making sense, or you don't consider them to be important. But that might what they might just be saying might be an important outlet for you to get an extension through. So yeah, I always think that people make the mistake of talking over other teams during the debates. Also, I think that closing half requires a lot more division of labor. So this means that you have to trust your partner that is member to deliver the extension, and your partner as member has to trust you as whip to respond to things that they weren't able to think of responses for, either given that the factory focused on developing the extension as well. So yes, how then do you do this, this division of labor very correctly and accurately? If you think there is something important as member that you want whip to address, just write it down on a note, or tell them, once that speaker has finished speaking, that you think that this is important for them to respond to. As whip, what you should focus on, especially when your partner is giving their speech and has given their speech as well, is what did they not say? I think that the rule of thumb, or the way I always try to listen to my partners every time, no matter how good they are, I always have, if I'm always speaking as whip, that means I have a very good partner that I trust to speak as member. Yeah, but usually in this case, I'm listening to see what mistakes are they making. Is my partner spending too much time, on rebutting or instead of actually making the extension? If they made the extension, but they didn't miss out on an important link in extension. So this means that you are criticizing your partner. Not that you tell them when they are back, like, you had a terrible speech. Like, why did you focus so much on, oh no? Everyone is gonna make that mistake, even you are too. But the goal here is that you want to try and anticipate what mistakes that they made in order so you can rebuild, from the stuff that they haven't said adequately as well. So listening is very important in doing this. If you don't listen, then there's no way that you would know or you'd be able to identify what mistakes that your partner made and for you to be able to adjust as well. This also means that you're listening to the next speaker that addresses your partner as well, that tries to respond to them. And you're also tracking the POI engagement in the debate. Like, a lot of people also don't track the POI engagement, and they just lost. People think that the POI game is like really fun. Like, just it's fun to just raise your hand and ask a point. Or you just want to react to someone and you just ask a point. Sometimes when people are making POIs or asking POIs rather, they are genuinely really concerned about something that's going on in the debate and they want to point this out immediately as possible. So you want to track that POI engagement, the extent to which people, responded adequately to certain POIs might also be something that you factor in as well while making the whip speech. As member as well, you want to ensure that you are developing the extension in a way that doesn't allow your partner to have too much work to do or doesn't put your team at a disadvantage. I noticed this as well at a comp where I attended, where there was a round where the member just, gave the extension, but there was no conclusion in the extension. And the problem here is that it just is a lot of work for Wave to do because at that point, even though the rules allow you to do this, the rules allow you to do this from what flows from the debates, which might be sort of difficult for you to do to establish an impact, if it is the case that your analysis isn't very different from your opening. So I always encourage that one, as member, you don't focus so much on responses. You focus a lot more on, delivering the extension, unless maybe your extension is a rebuttal extension. Like if the extension is a responsive extension, then you might want to, focus on this in this way and, flag this at every level that you are responding. But it would not be nice, the job of the whip is obviously to do the responses. So this means that if you do the obvious job of the whip, and you focus too much on this, the judges may not be inclined to listen. And that's usually one thing that when it gets to back half, judges are already burnt out. So you want to sound fresh. This means that the newest stuff is what you want to discuss first. If you have a new framing, you want to focus on this and talk about this early enough. If you have a new characterization, you don't have a new frame, you want to focus on this. If you have new impact that you think that is going to be fresh and hasn't been considered in the debate, you want to articulate this early enough to the judge, so that it's very clear that you have something new, as opposed to responding to something that already exists in the debate, unless that's your only strategy coming from closing. So yes, I'm going to respond to the question, which is, what do you do if you can't form more than one argument as the PM? Okay, so I think that usually this applies in debates where you have limited knowledge. That might be the sort of debate. If anyone has a question about what I said so far about closing our strategy, you can please put them in the chat or raise a hand. But yeah, when it comes to the fact that you can't form more than one argument in a PM, it might just be the case that you just have limited knowledge about the stuff. But additionally, it's not the job of one speaker in the team to come up with arguments. So you should be doing the argument building as a team. So this might be a rare instance. But if this happens or this ever happens, then the advice that you want to take here is, what is the opposition team likely to run? If it is the case that it's difficult for you to come up with an argument for your side, then you want to come up with argument for the other side and respond to this preemptively in your speech, which is very easy to do. One of the ways that you sort of try and go about PMing as well. So if it is the case that you can only come up with one argument for your side, either because you have limited information about the motion, for example, or you have limited information about the side that you're on, or you just maybe have a very difficult prep session, you might just want to focus on, maybe making an argument and ensuring that it's as bulletproof as possible. I don't think that there's anything bad in running one argument in 7 minutes. I've had to do this, maybe not in PM, but I've had to do this, I once debated a motion that discussed that this house believes that the theory of communism is immoral. So I could only come up with one argument as well in that round, and it was just a principle that this was immoral because of everything that it does, everything that is described in the book by Marx and Engels required you to do something that's immoral. So, like the redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor constituted theft, theft in the form of identity, theft in the form of the fact that you steal from people in order to give to others, theft in the fact that in it lied to people. In order for you to lie to people, in order for you to steal from people, you have to lie to them, so that they don't react as well. In this case, so what we said here just bordered around why theft it was in principle bad, and why the theory of communism in principle did in the theory general did constitute some form of theft. Either that it stole from others to give to others, it stole from your identity, because like in the book, then what it would imply is that everyone has to wear short sleeves, and if you liked wearing long sleeves, or if wearing long sleeves was maybe more expensive or less expensive, then no one would be allowed to wear long sleeves. Everyone would be required to wear the same thing, so people couldn't construct an identity for themselves. So it's just to give like a multi-layered approach to that particular argument. But if that's not available as well, then you want to think, what is the opposing side likely to say as a response to this particular argument? And I think that I sort of made this example when I discussed the way that you analyze or make the argument for democracy. So if democracy is the only thing that you can run, usually this is also an accessible argument that people might make, in debates about this house would invade, a country, that you have no idea about. And the only argument that you can come up with from PM is, democracy, why you shouldn't invade them, because sovereignty, that every country should remain sovereign, etc. And so this might be the only argument that you're able to come up with from PM. And what you might want to explain here, given that what is it like, the response that you're going to get is, why is sovereignty important if people are going to abuse others, if it's the case that a military government is going to be oppressive. This was sort of popular during the time when how do you say it? Niger had some sort of military coup, as well as in Mali and Burkina Faso. There are a lot of debates about whether or not ECOWAS should invade that particular country, and this might be very novel for you if you have to debate a motion that this house believes that ECOWAS should invade Burkina Faso, and you have zero idea about what Burkina Faso is, what sort of mineral resources they have, and you're like PM. Sorry, maybe a PM or LO, or maybe this has opposed the invasion or something. This has opposed sanctions based on that particular country. Or it might be that you have to even oppose the sovereignty point, and you have to explain why invasion is justified and why sovereignty is not absolute. You just want to discuss this in multiple ways and anticipate the likely response. The likely response that you might get if you are defending sovereignty is why that particular government is not going to be oppressive towards its people, which you want to explain internally within the MEC why they are less likely to be repressive if you don't try to invade them, because the notion this house would invade doesn't it presumes that invasion happens. It doesn't presume how long that invasion is going to take in order for it to be successful. Maybe you want to also deal with them and push them back on why the success of that invasion is unlikely, or why they take more time and kill more people as well. So yeah, you might have one argument, which is to explain sovereignty, but do you want to explain why their side is more difficult to achieve as well? Not that it's difficult because they cannot invade, but they would invade, but it might kill a lot more people than they're trying to save by violating sovereignty, which is important. So yes, I don't know if this answers your question, but I could recap them. One is that it just might be a knowledge problem, which is that you don't just know so much about the motion. Secondly, and the way to go about this is that you might just want to build up, internal mechanisms in your case and try to analyze it in different ways. And finally, is that you want to anticipate what the other side is going to run and try to respond to this as possible, given that I oftentimes see the PM as an inverted version, as an inversion of the upwhip. So I do see the PM speech as an upwhip speech usually. So I always try to construct my PM speech as possible to mirror what the up team is going to say and respond to it. So if you just have one argument, I don't think that's bad. You might spend a lot more time just giving the optims a higher burden in the debate, which means that, at that point, your DPM is able to adapt. Maybe they might have more time to think of your arguments, but now you have less work to do, which is less responsive work to do. So if you don't have maybe a good more than one argument, you can make that one argument and spend more time responding. That isn't disallowed in PM as well. And I think, as we discussed in the rebuttal workshop, that there are a lot of ways to go about responses. So it doesn't mean that you have to, identify every portion of their case. It just might mean that you have to frame properly. That means what are the most important things in the debates? What impacts are the most important things to consider? How are the ways actors are going to behave in a motion? Why are they going to behave that way? What incentives do they have? What capacity do they have? What are they made of? Study also might mean that you have to identify why the impact that you consider important, why they're important. So these are preemptive ways that you try and attack the opposition teams. So you know what they're going to run, and you sort of want to frame it out in the debate and say that this is not going to be the most important thing in the debate, and point out why, or explain why the analysis that they would require in order to make this argument assumes that people would behave rationally, for example, or assumes that the motion doesn't change the capacity of a particular actor or change the incentive that they have. Yeah. So I don't know if this answers your question, but you can give me a thumbs up if it does, or you can ask a follow-up if it doesn't. Does it answer your question? Debates are B. Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm assuming that there are no more questions about the stuff that we've discussed so far. So I'm going to move on to the next thing about studying teams. I think I sort of implied a lot already for the vast majority of this session, which is what are the strengths of the team, what are the weaknesses, and what are their fears. So I think I'm just going to discuss a lot more about fears because I've talked about strengths and weaknesses. I might go back to that anyways, but yeah. When it comes to what teams are afraid of, I think that people also, debate is an intellectual sport as well. It's also psychological, in as much as some teams are afraid of other teams, and that means that they make mistakes because they are afraid. This is also something I've learned and I've experienced in debates. So, for example, a team sees you in the debate room and is so worried about what you're going to run, you can always take advantage of that. You can always take advantage of that. A team is afraid of you winning that particular round, and you're CEO, and you know everything that they're trying to do is to sort of try and beat you as well in the debate. Or they're just going to try and fixate on you. That's because they are sort of afraid of you. And you can always utilize this in the debate. So I'm just going to give an example. So there was this round. I think that this was round 9 or round 8 of the WEDC last year. So we were CEO. The motion was this house believes that the feminist movements in developing countries should align with religion or something along those lines. And opening opposition was like, I think that they were trying to beat us so desperately in that round. So they made this case about, why the feminist movement does it, then it's going to lose funding. And, funding was the most important thing, that the movement did care about, etc., etc. So I think that we noticed this because we are beating them in one round. And, we noticed that they were going to be desperate to beat us in this new round as well. So we sort of discussed this in prep. And we knew that they were going to run the funding argument. So it wasn't like we didn't know that they were going to run it. They were obviously a good team. So what we said was that, okay, they run a funding argument, but let's run something else that doesn't talk about funding entirely. So as we anticipated, they did run the funding argument. And then, they made the case that, everything in the round was contingent on how much funding that they're going to get. If the movement loses out on money, then this means that, that it's not able to do, to help women, et cetera, within those places. We said, okay. So what we did was to ensure that we weren't contingent because they were just obsessed with beating us. So every case that we made in prep wasn't going to be about funding because we knew that they were going to make the funding argument and going to try and weigh that case against us and try to make it contingent. So what we said was that, everything about funding is untrue. So what we started built our case around was to say that, they hadn't fully proven that the movement would lose funding, because the movement aligns with the church. Like, that wasn't a harm that was plausible. If it is the case that you care about helping someone, you wouldn't stop helping them, because of the fact that, they aligned with a group that was likely to help them. You know, if the movement did align with a group that was likely to help them, then you might consider this as a good strategy and even fund them more. So that's what we said. Like, it was unproven. Like, the only way that you could prove that someone would stop funding the movement was if you thought that strategy was going to fail. So what we said that we were going to prove was that the strategy of the movement aligning with religion was going to fail, which will be prior to the funding argument. Because the only way that you'll be able to think that I should not put my money here is if where you put your money in is going to fail. Because what we said was that, one, the feminist movements in developing countries are made up of people who are, socialized into religion. So, like, meaning that prehistorically, the sort of funding that they were able to have access to came with the recognition that these people were, aligned with religion in the first place. It's kind of going to be difficult that, the fact that people are now going to say, let's opt in back into religion, then that means that their sponsors are going to stop giving them money, and then, the movement is just going to break down as a result. So what we tried to do was to break the funding argument to say that in order for you to stop funding, you had to think that your money was not going to be used well, and that's only why you're going to stop funding. So that's the thing that they hadn't proven, and that's what we're going to prove. So this sort of flipped the case then. It sort of meant that, we weren't contingent in funding, but rather funding was contingent on us proving that, that the movement was going to lose, was going to fail, which was sort of easier to do anyways, because I thought this was easier to do because, one, what we proved here was that, there are multiple religions that exist. So if the movement was really talking about religion, then, it's going to emphasize that people should opt into religion. It kind of dictates what religion people opt into. So it's like we're going to create a feminist church or something. But like, it's going to encourage that people opt into, religion as well. So that means that people are going to be able to do this by themselves, which sort of breaks down the movement, specifically in this way, given that people align with multiple religious views. So there's going to be some sort of tension. So what we said here is that this impact happens on two levels. Either happens on the basis of the fact that, people may not opt into, may not agree with other women, because of the fact that they have different religion, or when religion abuses people because of the fact that those religions are fragmented, then it's kind of difficult to call out such abuse. So we sort of prove that abuse within religion as well is likely because of the fact that, when the movement opts back into the church, it's not going to be like, partnership between the feminist movement and, religion, because of the earlier reason that people are opting into different religions as well. But additionally, it was the case that the religion treats the women as converts, like, people who are saved by God's grace. So the power asymmetry is still higher because religion possesses greater power, narrative control. That it just meant that they're able to, decide and, construct why people opted in the first place, which sort of means as it's difficult for the feminist movement to control the narrative there. At that point, that means that they're more vulnerable to what the church says about them. They're much more likely to be submissive and not given, this sort of inclusion, because I think that the Lodrikov case was that, the church is advanced to give them inclusion, which was unlikely if it is the case that the church possesses more, advantage at the point where these women decide to opt into the church, either because of the fact that they are smaller numbers, or because of the fact that they are treated like, converts, like people who are saved. So if it is the case, then that religion has this amount of narrative control and power, then it was likely to exploit this in ways that means that, it sort of infantilizes these people are supposed to treat them as equals, which sort of means that, innovation is slower. So what we said here was that conclusively, this strategy was going to fail, either because, more abuse is going to occur because of this gives religion more power, but as well, that abuse is going to occur on a scale where it's fragmented. And finally, that means that, you wouldn't donate because, the movement breaks down, but also that the movement isn't achieving any goals, so you wouldn't donate. So the donation point was going to be contingent on us. And then we took this a step further by saying, because of you lose funding, then that means that you're not able to help women in proximate ways. Like, funding wasn't tailored to help the movements, like, campaign or protest on the street, but funding was, given so that people can be able to access things like abortion, for example. So If it is the case that the movement loses that sort of funding, then it means that it goes less to proximate things that people need. So this was like the sort of way that we got past. Oh, they were a good team, and but I think that the fear that they had in that round was that they wanted to beat us so desperately, and they were afraid that we would win, and they ended up focusing on that as well. Also, this applies to novice teams, like teams that these are like teams that are in the same skill level with you. They know your strengths as well. So that means that if you notice that a team is going to be hyper focused on a particular strength that you have, you are going to take this to your own advantage. They're afraid of you this way. Then you can take this as well into consideration and take advantage of this. Also applies to novice teams. And this is always what I encourage people not to do in debates. If you are a newbie or like a novice, and you are in a room where they're like pros, and it's not nice to show them that you are afraid of them. This doesn't mean that you don't do everything else that is required of you in the debate room, but to concede that you have lost before the debate starts means that you would lose immediately. Like, this is usually how it happens. Like, if you feel like your opening or the other teams in the debate are better than you and they would make more sense than you, this would affect how you engage them, means that you might not be as engaging in the round as well. So if you're afraid, it's going to show. And other teams in the room are going to take advantage of it. Either they're going to ignore you entirely and not engage you. So this means that as much as possible, try not to be timid. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and be reasonable. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and analyze your case. But this means that any point where, while you're not asking POIs and around and you are sort of detached at the couple from the debate, people will notice this and treat you as fourth automatically. At any point where you are not engaging with other teams, either the fact that you make your case in isolation, or you are in your speech, praising one particular team because you've heard great stuff about them and you're trying as much as possible to make your case in a way that pleases them, you're definitely going to lose to that team, but it's sort of going to be obvious to judges and the rest of the teams in the debate what you're trying to do. And when people spot this, it's also going to be difficult for you to win or even place second in that round. So don't be obvious with your fear. If you're afraid of something, if you're afraid of a team, let that fear die before the motion is released, and be more willing to engage the team based on what the sort of knowledge that you have and the sort of experience that you have, beyond the fact that this team is obviously better than you. Because if they're better than you, then they would beat you 9 over 10, 9 in 10 times. But if you are afraid of them, they would beat you 11 in 10 times. So that's the difference, because they will beat you even before the round, before any round starts. So that's I think that's what people should be aware of. But when it comes to strengths and weaknesses, I think I covered some of this earlier. Well, when you're attending a comp, study the teams that you're going to meet there. What are they good at? What are they bad at? Also, in your team, this is very, very important. What is your partner good at doing? What are they not good at doing? Beyond the fact that you can always talk to them about this, I think I explained at the start of the session that there is a small window to improve on your weaknesses between the tournaments, that is in between the tournament that's happening. So if you tell your partner that, guy, you're not really good at responses, and you just expect them to improve at responses after round 3, and when they wake up around 4 tomorrow, they are finally then joking. So know the person that you're going to partner with, and what are they good at. They're good at something, they're not good at something. We all can be good at everything. So this means that what you try and do is to maximize on the strengths that you have in the team. If someone is weak at something and you're going to partner them, try as much as possible to cover up for that weakness, as well as a member of the team. But this also applies to how you interact with other teams that you meet. Some teams are better than you, but why are they better than you? What are they good at? What are they bad at doing? What do they not know how to do as well? They seem good at explanation or analysis, but bad at weighing. You have to notice, and that might mean that you are able to explain why their case is important than they are, which also is an important thing. Like, if a team has spent so much time analyzing, then providing a non-extension, which is the way to adjudicate the debate, might be a way that you're able to win. Because weighing also counts as an extension. So maybe they're not good at explaining why their cases are important, and providing all of the metrics that would explain that particular thing, but you are good at it, and then you're able to take advantage of it and beat them as well. Yes. So I think that's all about studying teams. And if anyone has any question, please provide your question. Otherwise, I'll just talk finally about outround strategy. So yes, outround strategies are usually, very, very complex. I think I always tell my students that if you place second in every round from round one to finals, you'll probably make the finals of every comp. This is what I always say. Like I think that this math works if the break is not very competitive. But yeah, it does work. No, I think even at WDC, like if you have an 18 point, you're most likely going to break if an open. So if you have 2 points, 2.2 points, if you play second from round one to round nine, and you play second in all of the elements round, then you probably get a second and you make the finals. So what I'm trying to say here is that the goal in usually in debating, and more importantly, even in the out rounds, because in the end rounds, you could take a first and take a third, and they both balance each other. But in the out rounds, if you take a third, then sorry, there's no way to come back again. So yeah, how do you always try? And I can say this confidently as well because I think that most of the time, or most of the in-person comps I've attended, I don't think I haven't made a final. So I'm going to maybe have some advice that might be useful for him. So when it comes to the out round, the way that you always want to ensure that you don't place third or you don't place fourth is by trying as much as possible to be the most engaged in the team. And engagement is usually how teams are self-selected for in the out rounds of the competition. So engagement is how you try and self-select for teams. And how is this done? When motions are set in out round and when you receive the motion in the out round, usually as well, they're always meant to have arguments that are accessible on both sides, especially early enough in the out rounds, like the quarters as well, when teams are have different strength advantage as well. So what people always fail to do is that they think of themselves, or what people do and becomes a problem is that they think of themselves or think of their team alone, in that particular out round. And this means that usually they are either fixating on their case and not actually engaging with the other teams in the round. So I think that the first step here is to also know who is the strongest team in the room. Like, if you are debating against, the team who broke first, this doesn't mean that they would always leave the room. They could make a very fatal error and not leave that particular room. But they are much more likely going to be the strongest team in that room. This doesn't mean that you fixate on them, but this means as much as possible that you want to cancel two teams out of that particular room. And that requires very, very keen level of observation. What teams are the weakest and the teams that you can easily got out of this room as well. So when you are at opening, usually in the out round, as much as possible is to try as much as possible to not leave your back half team extensionless, but to try as much as possible to ensure that they really have the less important things to say. So I think that this is the most important thing, that if you're an opening half, at closing, in an out round, you don't want to see that your closing team has a lot to say, or is able to radically change the debate from what you have been discussing so far. That is the most important thing. Like, one, this means that you have to check that you are defining the motion correctly, which is that you aren't defining the motion in a way that means that you neglect a portion of it. If the motion is this, house with aggressively do something, then you know that your closing could just, really come back with that crazy rhetoric about aggressively doing stuff and then just leave the room from you. So you want to ensure as much as possible that you are double checking that your assessment of what the motion requires you to do is correct. Secondly, that the best case that you would run in that debate isn't just your case, but the best case requires you to respond or engage with the other teams in the round as much as possible, which a lot of people don't do. A lot of people, just assume, or a lot of people just think that their case and running it very well is going to guarantee them a win. But no, that's not the case, especially if it is that, usually the other teams in the room also have they have an argument that they can also make for their side as well. So what you want to do is calculate, be as calculative as possible in terms of understanding what the other side is going to run, and also how you can beat them at this. I'm going to give, just a few examples related to certain outrans I've been in. So I think that this was the semis of the PAUDC. The emotion was this house welcomes how do you say, this house welcomes the Sahel Alliance. So it's a group of states that are together. They are largely dictatorships. So when we got the motion, we had little information about the Sahel Alliance, like little information. We know that they are resource rich, landlocked, for some of them, and we know that usually not all of them are autocracies, most of them are. So that debate, what we anticipated was going to be a clash about um whether or not the alliance was going to succeed or not. Like that was going to be the most important clash in the debate. So what we did try to prove is that we tried to prove that the alliance would be unsuccessful, and we've hurt a lot of people. So and we tried to be very detailed, in terms of making this claim and making this impact. So it would stand till the end of the debate. And one as well is that we are anticipating that the case about democracy is going to be weak in principle if we run it. Not that we didn't run it anyways. We did run it, but the case about democracy is going to be weak just in principle, because if the judge doesn't believe that principle, then you would just lose. So we had to prove something that in the principle integrates that practical stuff, like practical stuff about how those harms are going to occur. It's not just to say that democracy is valuable in principle, but that in the absence of the practice of democracy, people are going to suffer. And this is what we try and explain, and try to link it to what are the incentives of the AU not to support this Sahel alliance, which I think that the opposing side tried to claim. So ECOWAS and the Sahel alliance are not really cool with each other. But what are the incentives for the AU also to agree with ECOWAS? So we try to make this analysis as much as possible. Who is likely to come to their aid? Because what we sort of anticipated here is that the Gov team, the op teams in that room, are not going to try and beat us on democracy. They're just going to try and tell us that democracy isn't important, and people being able to live good lives, which they aren't living because France and has some sort of imperialist influence over their country, might be something that they care about, and want to win themselves off beyond just wanting democracy, because they aren't free in the first place. They aren't free because of some imperialist influence, and France is exfiltrating their resources. So we know that this is going to be the biggest concern of the opt-in, and the team on the Gov bench that wins is a team that addresses that particular concern. Why is the comparative, how do you say, going to be better in terms of the outcomes of their resources, etc. So what we said here is that we try to frame this up by saying the debate wasn't about that. So we aren't going to talk about whether or not we like France. We don't think that we like France, but we think that we don't like the Sahel Alliance, because it's just going to prevent, the other alternatives that we believe that would be, a way to secure the preference of the people in eliminating France if that was their preference. But we sort of tried to explain that people had more preferences beyond just eliminating France within the Sahel Alliance, that sort of thing. So we did anticipate that, everything that the opt-ins would say would be an attack on people's living better, and, the Sahel Alliance working as a way to repel France. But that meant that we just had to explain very clearly that our burden from Gov wasn't to defend France, which would make us, more relevant than CG in the debate, because maybe they might try to go a different route and try to defend France. But if we never made this clear, then, they might just be like, maybe France is good for that particular country, and, etc. And that might make them sound very fresh when they sort of try and do this. But being engaging and anticipating what the opt-ins would say in that round prevents CG from just using the strategy, blindly, in a way that would make them sound fresh and would also put our case at a disadvantage as well. So yeah. Additionally, is that even if you are closing, in the out rounds, also you might struggle, in terms of coming up with extensions, or trying to beat the other teams in the debate as well. But additionally, is that sometimes we are assuming that people are making arguments, and we are concluding those arguments for them, which becomes a problem. Sometimes we are concluding that those arguments that they have made are correct, or that we are concluding that the outcomes of those arguments are terrible or bad. Usually they aren't. So like a team makes an argument and says, colonialism, or sorry, neocolonialism, and they're not really sure, neocolonialism. Intuitively, it might sound bad, but why is it bad? Like they haven't really provided that explanation. What is the comparative to neocolonialism? Why is it better? They haven't really provided an explanation. So when you're in back half, what you're trying to do is to uh draft out extra questions that people aren't answering in that debate and trying to provide either answers to those questions as well. Which I think is usually the best thing that you want to do for yourself if you are closing. Beyond the fact that you have no extension, but engagement as well can also get you ahead in that particular round. Because one, if the opposing teams are strong, then that means that they have a strong enough impact that you can refute. Um, which that maybe opening opposition isn't doing a very good job at refuting as well. But if they don't have a very strong impact, then even if opening opposition is trying to refute this by saying, this impact isn't going to accrue, you can, try and beat this by saying this isn't really a bad thing anyways. So, or try to posit a comparative that is better. Even if what your opening team might be trying to do is to actively disprove that that case is untrue, you might try a different pathway of saying, even if it's true, the best case on the opposite side is that this case is true, but true enough, but this isn't really a bad thing or leads to good consequences. I think I discussed extensively why people saying that, right wing politics or far right politics might lead to bad outcomes may not be, what are those bad outcomes and really are those outcomes bad? They might be bad in some cases, but today United States and China slash tariffs at each other, which maybe might be comparatively better or more reasonable than the soft escalation that had been happening 4 years earlier. So this is like maybe Trump raised tariffs about over 50%, when he resumed office in the first 100 days, but sorry, after the first 100 days on Liberation Day. But yeah, things are presumably much more better than they were at that time, or than they would have been if things kept on deteriorating slowly. So this is just to explain that certain impacts aren't intuitively bad if people haven't provided explanations for it. So some people might just make terrible conclusions, and the fact that you're able to refute this would count for you in the out rounds as well. So I think that usually it's not just about how much of material that you're able to come up with in an out round, but how much of engagement are you able to do in the out round is usually what tells for people, especially because in the out round judges are they're broken. So usually there's like not so much, to consider in terms of, am I accurately making decisions about teams? Certain judges are doing this, but in the outrans, people are much more free to prioritize certain arguments. And the panels are, constructed to be as diverse as possible. So this means that, in the case that you might appeal to a judge by making a very good argument, you may not appeal to another judge, who, buys or and you are a CG. So you may not appeal to them. And that might mean that the best way to appeal to them is to sort of track back on what they are prioritizing in that debate. So that's why engagement is very, very important. Because if you do a very good job on engaging the other side, then you would also, buy the judge who has a strong intuition towards your own side as well. So yeah, I think that this is all about our trans strategy. Yeah, I'm going to move to the question part of this session. How to be better at analysis and increase speaker score. Yeah, I think I talked about increasing speaker score at the last session that we did with hypothetical motions, I guess. But yeah, I think that the first part of the question explains the second part. So, which is that if you are better at analysis, then that means that you would increase your speaker score, because that's essentially what the scale says. The scale says that, arguments that are less vulnerable to competent responses, that's how the scale improves. So how vulnerable are your arguments to competent responses? Do you add periphery or irrelevant portions of an analysis to your argument? So yeah, I think that first thing in terms of how to improve analysis is to one, spend time providing independent mechanisms that are not this like similar mechanisms. So what do I mean by duplicate mech and independent mechanisms? So for example, some people are trying to prove why capitalists would raise prices, etc. And they just end up saying that they raise prices because they want to cut costs. They want to cut costs. They want to diminish the quality of the products, etc. They want to cut costs by hiring less workers that operate in these factories, etc. So they just give a lot of reasons. Five structural reasons why companies want to cut costs. Like why companies care about making profits, and all of those reasons are cost cutting mechanisms. So true, but like probably if you have listed like three instances of cost cutting, the judge already knows what you're trying to say. So it doesn't mean that listing more isn't bad, but it's sort of easy to respond to. Like someone would easily explain why companies care about something else beyond cutting costs. So this means that people have multiple incentives, or entities have multiple incentives. And when you're building your mechanisms, you want to ensure that you're building your mechanisms in a way that identifies that they have multiple desires, multiple preferences, multiple things that they care about, and sort of try and explain how these things would contribute to that particular thing that you're describing. So caring about cost cutting is one thing that companies care about. Companies also care about, how do you say, caring about your cost cutting is something that companies might do, but they also care about, increasing their market share. They also care about, getting the best talents, in the market. They also care about, innovation. All of this might interact with each other, but these are independent things that companies care about, aside from just cutting costs, which might just be a simple way that you're trying to explain that companies try to make profit. Companies can also make profit, by not doing all of the things that are embedded under cost cutting. So I think that the first thing that you want to try and do is think to yourself that you're not just making a similar mech and just assuming that listing multiple instances where that happens is good analysis. Because if someone just easily points out what you're doing, then it's going to be easy for them to respond to it. Secondly, is to build your case in a way that is resistant to, the trade-off. There's always a trade-off in a debate. There's always something that the other side is going to argue for. There's always some response that you have to your case. So what you want to try and do is to build your case in a way that sort of tries and responds to them. So this means that there are questions that they're going to ask of your case. Either a question about whether or not the case is true, or whether questions about whether or not that case is important. So I think I did give an example in the session, which is when you make a case about people lose their jobs, there's always this question that someone would ask you about, can they just get another job elsewhere? So this might be a question that you are able to answer relative to what the motion or which people are losing their jobs. So if you don't answer this question, then, it's sort of easy to respond to you, and you might make the argument, and no one responds to it, but it might just be that you don't have good speaker score because like the judge, obviously is able to intuitively think that there's some obvious response to the case. So yeah, judges are able to assess the arguments that you have made relative to how vulnerable that argument is to response, even if no one, provides that response as well. Additionally, which I also think that this is turns out to be very, very important in terms of improving your analysis, is grading your impact. And I think that I sort of mentioned something about this, which is that sometimes people are just trying to run a couple of arguments and trying to build them up to one particular single impact. So I think, for example, that people might respond to signaling in a way. So like usually when people are making arguments about, maybe deterrence, for example, sometimes it might be the case that you get to deterrence, beyond punishing people, you might have a signaling effect, that this has a society that creates deterrence. Deterrence might mean, not just that people don't commit a crime, it might just mean that people are less recruited into it. Beyond the fact that, deterrence might mean that, those organized crime groups are less willing to commit that crime. It might also mean that, they are less able to recruit people because less people are available to be recruited in that particular case. So yeah, sometimes like people are not grading their impacts, they're just reading one single impact and like deterrence, but it might occur in multiple ways as well. So this also might be a way to improve your analysis and speaker score. There are multiple ways around this as well. But yeah, I think that the question about improving your speaker score is embedded in improving your analysis, also as well, which is embedded in explaining beyond just the duplicate mechanisms that you might have, but additionally as well in explaining the stuff that you have with different grades of impact. So like there is a mild colored or minty grade, and there's also a very spicy grade that you have on in terms of the impact that you're constructing. So some impacts are very high and difficult to prove, but that doesn't mean that your analysis only would prove those high impact. There are impact that you can pick up along the way by making in terms of making those arguments. So in terms of trying to prove that, maybe if you the approach that is incorporated by, Bukele in El Salvador in terms of, tackling crime, tough on crime approach might just be, valuable for people in terms of, that tough on crime approach would mean that, people stop committing crime. That might just be a harder burden to prove than, that just has a signaling effect that society is safe, or that this just means that people stop being available, like for recruitment to the syndicate groups, uh, before you just go on to say that this would make people stop committing a crime. So that sort of thing. I don't know if that answers your question, if it makes sense. I would assume yes. Okay. Okay. The person who asked the question also is not here anymore. Anyways, the final question that I see at the chat, which is how do you improve? How do you understand what is important in the debate? I think that this is like a very complex question because like this is dependent on what is the debate that's happening. Um, but I think that what is important in the debate implicitly might be decided based on the uh, magnitude of the impact that that is having, or vulnerability of the people that impact affects, or how reversible is that impact if it ever happens, and it's negative or positive. Uh, what is the uh, what is the uh, likelihood of that particular impact in the first place? So there are multiple ways that you can assess and know what is. Sorry, please mute. Yeah, thanks. So there are multiple ways that you can access and understand what things are important and what things aren't. Um, I think that likelihood of why those cases that you're making plausible in the first place is presumably the first attempt that a lot of people use. Because if that impact is not going to accrue, then it means that it's not really important in the first place. So likelihood is usually the most important thing. Then because sometimes it's if things haven't substantiated their case very clearly, then there's no reason for why the judge should be crediting it in the first place. So yeah, I think it depends on the extent of the engagement, either positive or negative analysis that people have made in the direction of that specific argument, or that argument related to other arguments in the round. But in all things being equal, that argument has been substantiated very clearly or articulated very clearly. What also might be important here might be, who it affects and how it affects them. Are there ways in which they're able to absorb that impact? That would mean that if effect is not proximate to them, if that impact happens to them, are there ways that we can reverse it? Are there ways that we can control it? Yeah, so there are multiple ways that are able to arrive at the conclusion about whether or not the case is important. But obviously, this would rely specifically on the debate that is happening and the emotion, what that emotion implies that people are able to successfully analyze within the debate. All right, I think that's all. Do people have any more questions about this stuff? All right.
Okay,
Kaushik?
I think I'll take over then, Sam. Thank you so much, Sam, for another insightful and valuable session for all of the participants. I'm pretty sure that the people who are viewing this later on YouTube, as well as who are participating currently, took a lot away from the session. Thank you for adjusting to our time frames as well, Sam. I know it was very hard for you to also accommodate 3 days of sessions, but I think all of the three sessions were really informative and very productive to all of the participants here. We thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on board. And we do hope that we can see you again soon, including the participants at some point of time in the future with our other workshops as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much, Kaushik. It was nice